Good evening.
It is a delight to be with you again this evening for the fourth session. That's right, there are 5 in the book. 4th session of Welcome to the Wisdom of the World, Just Conversations with People of Other Faiths. And as we perhaps mentioned last week, today is the crazy religion that has been dominating most of the Western world for about 1800 years. A little religion called Christianity. And the book, the section in the book that talks about this, a couple of people actually have mentioned to me ahead of time that it was interesting to them because Sister Joan Chittister, of course, is a Catholic nun, lives in a, does she call it a monastery?
Monastery.
I guess she calls it a monastery. There's not like a female version of monastery?
A sister-stery.
A sister-stery. Anyway, she obviously is coming from a quite different perspective than many of us come from when it comes to Christianity. And that influenced the very questions that she asked about Christianity. But we are delighted tonight because we have with us someone who represents Christianity, but also comes from a part of Christianity that most of us have not grown up in. So the Reverend Dr. JoAnne Terrell is here from Chicago Theological Seminary. She has been a professor there for 21 years. Actually, I printed out and then didn't bring up the very interesting little snippet that she has about herself on the bio page, but it talks about her various interests in Christianity, and one of those, at least, is the arts, and trying to use the arts as a way to teach, to reveal the depth of God's presence and God's Spirit in so many different ways, and using the arts as a way to break through some of the common perceptions about what Christianity, what the faith is all about. So I've asked Dr. Terrell to do about 15 minutes of introduction to herself, her perspective, a little bit about her background maybe, and then we'll go to the questions and do the same sort of thing that we did before. She'll present for a few minutes and then I'll provide a very quick kind of summary response, and then we'll leave quite a bit of time, 25 minutes maybe, at the end for questions from all of you. So, the Reverend Dr. JoAnne Terrell, thank you very much.
And because I am a preacher, I took a text, although I won't be really explicating that text very much, but it just says so much about how I feel about love, and which is the way in which many of my ancestors believed and practiced love, because love is something you not just feel, but you practice it. And the text comes from Romans, the 12th chapter, the 9th and the 10th verses, and it says, "Let love be without dissimulation, without hypocrisy. Abhor that which is evil, and cleave to that which is good." Amen.
Amen.
So grace and peace to all of you, to Pastor Solberg and to Carol Roble. Thank you for the invitation to join you in this study of Sister Joan Chittister's insightful and fascinating book, Welcome to the Wisdom of the World and Its Meaning for You. Tonight, in these closing days of the season of Lent and the opening days of Women's History Month, we will reflect together on the concept of Christian love through the prism of 5 thoughtful questions she raises in the chapter of the same title. But first, I would like to share with you a bit about my vocation as a theologian, how I came to the work, and how I go about being and becoming a minister and a professor of theology, ethics, and the arts. I was born in Springfield, Massachusetts, and was initially reared in the South, in a family that consisted of my beloved mother, my stepfather, who was in the Air Force, both of whom are of blessed memory, and 6 older siblings, all of whom loved me immensely. Ours was not a religious home. We were not churchgoers. We did not speak often of God or of morality, but we valued learning. We had social and political consciousness, and we even had some vestiges of religion in our household: a family Bible, and a 3-dimensional depiction of the crucifixion of Jesus situated in a brass whatnot that held bric-a-brac such as my mother's ceramic birds, which I hated and which I broke every time no one was looking. But that whatnot itself functioned as a mandala on a symbolic level, as a kind of unifying thing that helps you to organize your own psyche and your own consciousness. And I used to ponder that thing as a child, that suffering image of Jesus. I used to ponder it for hours on. I had no idea who this man was, much less the clean version. Once you look askance at the picture and you see this clean version of Jesus ascending into heaven, you know, the 3D technology from the 1950s and 60s, that, yeah. So I used to ponder this for hours on end, and I related it to the suffering that I was experiencing in the context of my parents' alcohol abuse, the intrafamilial violence that was always occurring, as well as the social violence that we, like all black people in the South, were trying to avoid individually or confront collectively. In my desire to be a loving person, and when I say desire to be a loving person, I mean something that I feel that I was innately gifted with, this will to love and to have that love be an expression of my character. I sought out the comforting spirit and the wisdom to deal with it all, even as a very young child. And that spirit never failed to show up. I instinctively concluded that this spirit and source of wisdom was God, and that God was not responsible for the evil that I had already witnessed. People were and are responsible, and systems of oppression were and are responsible. I knew at a very young age that nothing would ever capture my imagination the way that theological questions do whenever they arise in my inquisitive mind. When I was 8 years old, we were living on the island of Guam. I read the Bible and I baptized myself because I did not think my parents would allow me to be baptized. But by that time, I had already developed a wide cosmological perspective, a spirituality that was independent of any scriptural lens or doctrinal restrictions at all. It is precisely because we did not go to church and there was no one to interpret for me what I was seeing in the mandala, no one to explain what I was experiencing in my heart, mind, and soul, and nothing to mediate the divine spirit whom I was always encountering, that the Bible seemed to me to be the beginning of revelation and not the end of it. And while I wholeheartedly embraced my newfound Christian identity as a secret Christian, it seemed to me an approach, and not the only approach, to the immensity of God that I was experiencing, that I was witnessing in myself. So I remained open to what I could learn from other faith traditions. Upon my parents' divorce when I was 10, my older siblings had all left home, and I alone was left to live with my mother. She took a lover who abused her, shot her, and killed her when she was only 43 and I was 15. After this traumatic, defining event in my life, I lived with my uncle and aunt, a Pentecostal pastor and missionary whose theological lenses called for a deepened, I'm saying that kindly, a deepened and more restrictive engagement of the Christianity into which I was initially called.
Put on the blinders.
I left their home at 19. I was in college and studying behavioral science, and because I took so many courses in philosophy and religion, the department notified me that I could double major if I took 3 more courses, so that's what I ended up doing. I double majored in philosophy and religion and behavioral science. But it was during college that feminist consciousness began to stir in me as I tried to understand what had happened to my mother and how to prevent the same thing from happening to me and to other women from the perspective of the disciplines that I was studying. I wrote my senior thesis on the case for a just society, the redistribution of income as a means to end domestic violence. It was the beginning of what I have come to call academic activism, in which I have been engaged my entire academic career as a student at Union Theological Seminary in New York and as a professor at Chicago Theological Seminary for 21 years now. At Union, I studied with and was research assistant for Dr. James Cone, the renowned father of Black liberation theology. I studied Christian ethics with the late feminist Dr. Beverly Harrison, and as a doctoral student, I was a tutor for the first class ever in feminist and womanist theologies that she co-taught with Dr. Dolores Williams, one of the premier womanist theologians in the country. In her book, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, author Alice Walker appropriated the term womanist from the Black cultural expression, "You actin' womanish," and she articulated 4 instances of the definition to describe behavior that is audacious, courageous, willful, serious, and in charge, to include women who love other women sexually and or non-sexually, sometimes loves individual men sexually and or non-sexually, values women's culture, is traditionally universalist, is not a separatist, except for health, loves the moon, loves roundness, loves dancing, and loves herself regardless. In the last instance of the definition, she offers the analogy, womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender, which suggests an intensified experience of oppression. Because womanists are Black feminists, we have common cause with Black men to overcome racism, which is much more far-ranging in its impact than mere racial prejudice. They are not the same things, no matter how many times people call individuals racists. That's not what racism is. Racism is systemic. Racism is implicated in all the structures of society. It carries with it the assumption that you have the power to oppress not just an individual, but whole groups of people with the privileges that pertain to the power that is invested in one racial group. So it's much more far-ranging in impact than mere racial prejudice. Because we are women, we have a common purpose of overcoming the many forms of sexism with all of the women of the world. And because nothing follows Black people everywhere we live in the world more doggedly than poverty, Black women more often have to deal with race, gender, and class oppression not as serially experienced phenomena, but all together, at once, and all the time. And so, womanism is not a construct that we need to apply to our lives. Womanism is that which enables our lives. To have the courage and the audacity to do what we do, to ensure the survival of entire communities, male and female, to carry on in spite of the oppressions arrayed against us, is why Black women in the beginning of the womanist movement in the late 1980s referred to the double jeopardy or tripartite oppression, even quadruocentric oppression to include sexual oppression. And they referred to it also as interstructured oppression. But in postmodernity, the concept of intersectionality has superseded all of these terms to refer to the multiplicity of identities individually resident in Black women. And I am a womanist theologian. As a Black womanist Christian, spiritually eclectic theologian.
Say that again.
Black womanist Christian, spiritually eclectic theologian, I have thought a lot about love as a philosophical construct and as a lived practice in the private and public spheres. I love what Cornel West says about love. He says that justice is love in the public sphere. So, we have our private concepts of love, but in the public sphere, justice is the manifestation of love there. So I've tried to understand love as a philosophical construct and as a lived practice in the private and public spheres, and I've tried to understand love as the essence of the God whom most Christians claim we worship. But most importantly, I've tried to maintain my natural and youthful idealism. That is my desire and will to be a loving person, to approach the world and to see the creatures therein, including myself, as the scriptures teach us that God sees us, lovingly, as an imaginative, joyful creator would, piteously, as a compassionate companion would, wisely, as a resourceful caregiver would. It should come as no surprise to you that I have done my major work on the cross of Jesus as both a critique of human violence and as an expression of divine love. When Carol gave me the book to read and I encountered the questions that Sister Joan Chittister proposed, I wondered aloud how Carol or Sister Joan knew that these were the very questions I have struggled with for all of my life and about which I am still kind of deep in the throes of trying to answer for myself. I'm still struggling for clarity and for peace around the very questions that she asked. And then my answers to so far are reflected in my life choices. Sister Joan asks, why can't I just get away from it all? Oh, so, I mean, and of course, it's very understandable in postmodernity why anybody would frame that question, really, because we're overwhelmed with so much stuff to do. We're overwhelmed with distraction. Our phones can take us to another place altogether. I mean, we're always constantly bombarded with something to do. And we're expected to be doing something all the time in our Protestant work ethic-oriented world. But we have to think this question through and all theological questions through the frame of history. And we have to think about the impact of the ascetical community on general Christian theology, because it's much more thoroughgoing than many realized then and now. Asceticism, or rigorous self-denial, was a way of the church trying to recapture the moral rigor of the martyrdom church. And the martyrdom church had dissolved under Constantine's rule. Collectively, the church had to redefine itself as a public institution that was no longer illegal and no longer under siege. Do you experience yourselves as a church under siege? Maybe nowadays we find ourselves a little bit under siege by the implication that our doors might close for lack of new life. There's a burgeoning movement in the country called the spirituals but not religious, or the nuns, people who are not professing any attachment to any faith. And that's a burgeoning movement, and it's a worry of many mainline churches. But in Constantine's time, because he dissolved the illegal relationship that the church had to the Roman Empire, partially to boost the prospects of the Roman Empire for a little while longer, individual Christians felt a need to prove to themselves the quality and strength of their commitment to Jesus Christ, just as the martyrs had done in paying the ultimate price of their lives, that is, to witness to the faith. So the word martyr, the very word martyr, means witness. And a witness is not one who dies for the faith, but one who lives unto death for the cause of their faith. So we can still be living witnesses because we are willing to live to the point of death. And that's what a martyr is. And it's funny because when I was a little kid, I was so melodramatic with my newfound Christian faith that my sister told me once, "Don't be such a martyr." And I had no idea what she meant by that, and I was too proud to ask her what she meant by that. But when I was in seminary later, I got a good laugh from the fact that I was just so melodramatic as such a kid, that she would think that I had the martyrdom spirit all over me. Not one who dies for the faith, but one who lives unto death for the cause of their faith. So some ascetics, eager to witness, to be martyrs, subjected themselves to the terrors of the wilderness, to permanent separation from human society, from self-flagellations, and various self-inflicted punishments or self-mortifications. You've heard all of that stuff. Mortify your flesh, so that you can be righteous before God, and it's a part of a complex way of thinking or implying that there's something we do to merit salvation. And so the church, in its wisdom, as well as in an attempt to establish what would become orthodoxy, created not just the ascetical impulse, but communities of ascetics, those monasteries and abbeys, not merely to avoid the excesses of zeal that would lead to the false belief that some are thereby more righteous than others. But the church did that also to become an agent of good in the changing world. The church became the institution that spawned other institutions, such as hospitals, universities, and social service agencies. As Western Protestants, our overbusy world and our various brands of Christianity are similarly fraught with notions of merit and demerit, reward and punishment at the heart of our really attempts to be moral, and at the heart of the temptation to get away from it all, too. Sister Joan is trying to dissuade us from that way of viewing ourselves as somehow secretly damned.
Unless we're really busy.
Yes, really busy. Here every time the church doors open. Ignoring our own bodily needs in order to achieve some kind of faithfulness in our own estimation. I had to stop that. I really had to stop that, because I was making myself ill. Year after year, making myself ill. By the time they graciously give us a sabbatical after 3 years at CTS. And every time sabbatical rolled around, I was too gravely ill to enjoy it.
Wow.
And because I worked so hard, and I, of all people, should know that love and merit are unrelated concepts. I wrote it in Power in the Blood, my book, Power in the Blood. Love and merit are unrelated concepts. But we do that because we somehow feel we are secretly damned. And we're unable to feel quite at home right where we are, in the work that we are called to do. Unable to justify the good that is also our lot in life. Not just but the good that comes to us, we're unable to justify it. And we succumb to the temptation sometimes to isolate ourselves from the very people who make us whole. Sister Joan says that the power of the familiar will always call us back. But her whole discourse reminds me of the saying, wherever you go, there you are. You can't get away from the problem of you until you do that deep introspection about what is really my relationship to this God of love I am claiming I am related to. What kind of love is the love of God really offering? Is it really the conditional love that we often mete out to those we claim we love? How can we really affirm the unconditional love of God and believe it and be guided by that and be sustained by that? Well, it wasn't until I really explored the concept that woman has put forward, loves herself regardless, self-love regardless, until I began to embody that as a practice, to love myself regardless, even when I fail, even when I fall, because there's always somebody to tell you you're not good enough. You know, there's always somebody to judge you in this culture. There's always somebody to tell you that it's your fault. So as a lived practice, loving myself regardless has not been an easy. But the more I practice, the better I get at it. The more I'm able to let go of others' judgments. And it's because I really honestly believe that God's love is different from the way I have experienced love in the giving and receiving thereof. Is different, is much more faithful in what it is signifying. that self-love becomes more consistent, a more consistent response. It's the incentive that I need to do better, but not to condemn myself. Sister Joan also tells us that there's a need in all of us to go forward beyond ourselves, because alone our wisdom cannot sustain us. My wisdom is not enough. I need your wisdom and you need mine. The problem is that we're very discriminating. That's a real problem. We're very discriminating. And the fact is, everything in the universe is connected to every other thing in the universe. Every person is connected to every other person in the universe. I had my DNA analyzed, and it was so amazing. It's just so amazing. And I just think it's funny, too. It helped me to de-essentialize this idea of race so much, because I'm some of everything. I'm literally a universal person. I'm 26% Cameroonian. I'm 26% from the Ivory Coast. I'm 4% Southeastern Bantu. I'm 4% Finnish and Russian. I'm 13% Irish, 7% British, 1% Caucasus, 1% Italian, 1% Indian, 1% Native American, 1% Eastern Asia, somewhere along that Pacific Rim there. They can't quite narrow down which one of those Asian countries. 1%. I mean, and they have the ability to do this, to tell you. And I just discovered that I have an ancestor who I can trace all the way back to 1526 in Middlesex, England, whose direct descendants were Confederate soldiers in the northern part of Florida, where my mother's family is from. Oh my God, and I'm just like outdone with myself, me with a Confederate soldier in my heritage. I'm just totally outdone with it, but it helps me completely de-essentialize this notion of race. So we are connected whether we like it or not. But there are blind spots in our perception of who is related and who is not. There are blind spots. But for many of us, it's just a question of being willfully blind. We don't want to see the connection between us and others. We don't want to see that, because then we might be compelled to think differently, or do differently, behave differently. Regard others as having actually also been made in the image and likeness of God. Sister Joan also asked, what does it take to put excitement back into life? And I think that it takes what Rollo May called the courage to be. And it also takes kicking the definition of yourself that others have given you and perhaps you have believed about yourself to the curb. Give yourself permission to do what you want to do and to be what you want to be. I love the arts. I mostly focus on my own gifts as a singer and as a songwriter, as a playwright, and in terms of the performing arts. I don't have any ability in the visual arts. Well, I'm a pretty good decorator. That's a kind of a performing art or visual art. And I'm a pretty good photographer sometimes even. Not enough to have a photography book. But one of the things I gave myself permission to do was to do oil painting. And every now and then I pull up my canvas and I make something that to me is beautiful anyway. I don't think it would be beautiful to anyone else, likely. I'm not good at it. I know I'm not good at it. But the point is I gave myself permission. As a professor, I privilege creativity in the classroom, and I've developed a set of 10 principles or tenets of art. And the first thing I teach my students is that anyone can be an artist in any medium as long as she is willing to be a beginner. And that's what, I mean, when I think about my own child, my child hates to be a beginner at anything. She just wants to be able to be me. You know, she wants to be fully me already. I tell her all the time, I paid the price to be me. How you gonna just be me? But she never wants to be a beginner. She likes to go at, if she doesn't know how to do it, she won't learn how to do it. I'm like, what kind of way is that to be? You gotta be willing to be a beginner in order to excel at anything that you really want to do. And you can be an artist in any medium. But it also takes, to put excitement back into your life, it takes forgetting. As St. Paul famously said, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching to those things which are before me, I press towards the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Jesus Christ. Many of us are carrying baggage from our past. I told you the story of my upbringing, not because I wanted to dump some baggage on you and to have any shock value, but because that's baggage I put away a long time ago, and I have the perspective on it. I have the perspective on what happened to my mother. I know that how to name the systems of oppression that contributed to her downfall and her eventual murder. I know how to name those things. But many of us we're carrying baggage. Some of the baggage is from recent trips down lanes of futility. But we're carrying baggage that we don't need to carry. We're carrying the guilt of our parents' actions. We're carrying the burden of mistakes we've made and repented for time and time again. We go to the altar and say, take my burdens, Lord, and then we get up from the altar and we take them back with us to our seats. Because we don't know how to forget. There's a reason for the concept of the sea of forgetfulness in the Bible. See, because God remembers everything that's valuable to us and forgets everything that's not valuable to us. Everything that's going to lead to our redemption, God remembers exactly what it will take. And so I'll tell you a story about God's remembering. In 2002, I was invited to give a lecture at Bethune-Cookman College in Daytona Beach, Florida, which is where we lived when my mother was murdered. We lived actually about 6 or 7 blocks on the same street as Bethune-Cookman College. And they asked me if I would speak on the subject of women, religion, and domestic violence, because they were having problems in the relationship between the men and women on campus. And they wanted someone to speak to it who had considered the issue of violence in an extensive way. But they didn't know my personal story. They just invited me to come because they knew about my academic work. So I went there, and I was to speak at a symposium on Thursday and then give my main lecture on Friday. And so for all of this time now, my mother's been dead a long time. But for all of this time, up until 2002, I had never been back to the place where we had lived. I had gone back in my dreams, but I would have this recurring nightmare that I would get to the back door and I would try to go in, and I couldn't go in because I was too paralyzed with fear that someone would kill me. So I decided that Thursday evening that I would go to that place where we lived in the projects. It was an apartment complex, and I would go and I would see what had become of the place where my mother died. So I got there. I took my older sister with me, and I got there, and to our surprise, the whole row of apartments was now the Carl F. Brinkley Family Educational Center. And to our further surprise, the very apartment where we lived was a daycare center. This was meaningful to us because whenever my mother was not drinking, she would surround herself with little kids because she loved little kids. And it was just so meaningful for us that we decided we would go to the administrator's office and ask if we could be let into the daycare center because it was closed. And we happened to know the administrator from when we were children. And she let us in. And it was amazing to see the space redeemed in that way. Amazing. To see the primary colors on the walls and the toys and the mats where little kids played. And the most amazing thing about it for me was the very spot where the night of her death, my mother and I sat together in a chair, crying and holding each other. She had apologized to me for something that she had done to me. And we cried together and forgave each other. And that was the last time I saw my mother alive. And I consider that moment the most gracious thing that ever happened to me in my entire life. That when the last time I saw her, it was on those terms. It was in terms of pouring out love to each other. But to see that corner, that little niche where the chair sat, was just, it was just so powerful for me. And it reminded me that God never forgets anything. And that this was a moment for me of transfiguration. That whole apartment row of apartments and the apartment itself were the scene of transfiguration for my life. And a few years later, they tore those buildings down. But it had happened. It had happened. Just as the scene of transfiguration where Christ and met with Peter, James, and John and met Elijah and Moses on the mountain, just as that scene disappeared, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It happened. And it happened to remind you, to remind me of what God remembers and of what is possible. What is possible because God remembers what's essential. God remembers every single little thing that's essential, but forgets everything that's not important to us. But we can't forget our sense of our own burden of sin. And we need to forget those things because God has already forgotten them. So when Sister Chittister asked, how will I know truth when I see it? She gives the story of Sister Rosalia and Sister Marie Claire and how different they are and which model of being is the correct being. That's not a question for me. I think that you know truth when you do it. Not when you see it, but when you yourself do it. And you'll be able to recognize truth in others. And you'll be able to recognize falsity in others when people are not true to themselves. And much less to you. But when you do it yourself, you'll know it. And you'll know when you're not doing the truth. Each of us must live out our own singular piece of the truth with love. She also asked, what's wrong with me? Why can't I change? And she brings up the drunk uncle. Everybody has a drunk uncle. And my drunk uncle saved my life. Because he told me that God said for me to move to New York. And I told him, you better tell God to tell me himself, because I'm not moving to that God-forsaken place. But within a year, I had a job offer in New York to work for a famine relief organization. And so began the decolonization of my mind. Because, we're very parochial people. But now I was working for a famine relief organization that addressed poverty in.
The microphone keeps getting farther and farther away.
That addressed poverty in the Horn of Africa, and my mind began to realize the extent of the connectedness that we really do share on this planet. And so he saved my life. What's wrong with me? Why can't I change? So as you might well imagine, the fact of losing my mother in such a way has had a profound effect on my psyche, and a profound effect on my capacity to make relationships that last. That fear can be very gripping. But I've learned over the years that the contest for our own souls begins when we refuse to believe the Satan at work in us. Now I know we're liberals and we don't believe in Satan. We certainly not as an entity with a red suit and a long tail and a pitchfork. We certainly don't believe in that. But you need to understand something. The Satan is a concept in Judaism and in Christianity about the spirit of the accuser of humanity that is at work in the world. And you know that there are times in which you accuse yourself of not being enough. I think of Alice Walker's book, The Color Purple, in which Harpo, who's been dating this woman who rejects him, says to his father, "What's wrong with me? Why can't I have the love that I desire?" And his father says to him, "Your mammy." And Harpo says, "What's wrong with my mammy?" And he says, "Somebody kill her." So those kinds of stigmas live deep within our psyches. And you have to not believe the lie that gets built up in you about whatever has happened to you in life. I'm under no illusion that my suffering is the only suffering that ever happened in the world or even in this room. I always say to people, whenever I walk into a room and there's more than 2 people in there, I know there's an infinite amount of pain in the room. Some of it has been expressed and some of it is unexpressed. There's an infinite amount of pain in this room. So I'm not under any illusion that it's just my pain. But the way in which we begin that whole process of decolonizing our mind and refusing to believe the lie of the accusing spirit, wherever it comes from, to not believe that. And we change when we begin to see ourselves in the same way that God sees us, as lovable and as God's precious creation. Okay, so I didn't agree with her response on what is the purpose of life. I don't think it's merely to give alms. I think that's a word of comfort to the privileged rather than a divine directive. I think that we should be about the business of dreaming and creating a world that would actually bless the Lord. And to bless means to make happy. In other words, we should be making a world that makes God happy. One of my disappointments about the trip to Israel was that I realized the intransigence of humankind and the way in which...
They don't probably know about that.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I know about it.
Yes, yes. I went on a trip to Israel and Palestine. Carol and I went with some students and some other faculty from CTS. And one of my deep disappointments is that we don't have the political will or the moral will or the moral backbone or whatever, or the creativity to share the world. We don't have it, and and we don't have the will to make God happy with us. If we actually do that, then that calls for us to do something completely different from the way we've been doing it. It calls for a paradigm of Christianity that insists on empowering people rather than merely being benevolent. Because being benevolent never changes anything for very long. It just confirms you in your system of merit and demerit, and does not really empower you to be as loving and as free to love and as free to receive love as you can from the whole world. I feel deeply disappointed in our world because there are so many reasons why Sunday morning is still the most segregated hour in the U.S. There's so many reasons why women in my denomination cannot get viable pastorates. Still.
Wow.
Even though our denomination was one of the first black and first Methodist bodies to ordain women. It's one of the reasons why at the university level women are trained to serve and men are trained to lead. And so our purpose in life has got to be more than about what we're going to do with our money. What are we going to do with our morality? What are we going to do with our sense of our need for each other? What are we going? That's our purpose. Our purpose in life is really to connect to each other in the most profound ways that we can. Thank you for listening. And
Thank you. Those of you who have been here the previous weeks know that I got plenty of questions, but I want to hear from your questions. But let me start off just to get things rolling by asking. This actually was just like the first of many questions, but it was actually triggered by something you said very early in your talk, talking about womanist theology, and it made me wonder, what are the connections you see to Jesus and Jesus' life that you draw upon for that womanist theme? I loved the very easy, clear to understand image that woman is to feminist as purple is to lavender, and it made me just wonder, what are the resources, themes, experiences, teachings, whatever that you see in Jesus' life that informs that gives shape to that?
Well, Alice Walker herself is not a Christian. She is not a theist. In fact, she's a believer in God, but not a theist. Kind of naturalistic understanding of God. So she wouldn't read into her own definition what I see of Jesus in her definitions. And I see Jesus in all of her definitions. I see Jesus as an audacious spirit who challenged powers and principalities, who even challenged himself and received challenge beautifully, I think, particularly in the case of the Syrophoenician woman who told him even the dogs asked for the crumbs at the master's table, and he said, well, great is your faith, and be it unto you according to your faith. And so he was able to change on a dime, you know. So he was amazing in that sense, and he valued women's tears, as in the case of the woman who kissed his feet and cried on his feet and wiped his feet with her hair. He valued women's tears. He valued women's company. He loved women, and he loved his friends, whoever they were. He was a universalist who did not require of the people to whom he gave his gifts that they convert to Christianity. He did not require any of that, because there was no Christianity, first of all. And second of all, that was not his agenda. That was just not his agenda, to make Christians. He was about the agenda of empowering people and not just giving them benevolence, empowering them to be in community. But the self-love regardless, too, that's Jesus. That's very Jesus to me. So, you know, I'm from the black church, and in the black church, Jesus has exponential importance. He's exponentially the Jesus of history, and exponentially the Christ of faith. So, and together, they exponentially make his character really God. Very God of very God is said in the confession. Very God of Jesus is God, totally God. And what kind of God of love does not love God's self? And Jesus showed that he loved himself by his capacity to get away from it all when he needed to, by his capacity to share his gifts, and to then recoup by his understanding of power, that it wasn't something he needed to worry himself with. And to me, worryation with power is a sign of no self-love and no self-esteem. No truth and no self-esteem. And he wasn't worried about power. I love the story of the woman who touched the hem of his garment. It's couched between stories. It's couched between the story of Jesus going to Jairus' house with him. Jairus is the ruler of the synagogue. He's the symbol of authority in the story at first. And he comes and falls at the feet of Jesus. And this is symbolizing the disavowal of power and the vesting of Jesus with all the power, earthly and spiritual. And he says, with all of that power, Jesus goes with him to his house. That's power with and not power over. On the way to Jairus' house, the woman with the issue of blood touches the hem of his garment, and he says, "Who touched me? Because power has gone out of me." So, to judgment about this story, we think that power then is a zero-sum game, in which power for some means none for others. You know, but the story doesn't end there. He says, "I perceive power has gone out of me." And so when the woman comes forward and says, "It was me," he further empowers her. He further divests himself of power. He says to her, "Daughter," he equates her to himself. He's the Son of God. She's a daughter of God. He says to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you whole." So he's further disempowering. He's not worried about power. He just notices when power is going out of him, that there's a tax on him. But by the time he gets to Jairus' house, he has enough power to raise the little girl from the dead. Now see, that's somebody who's not worried about power. But we worry about power. And that's a sign of low self-esteem. Jesus had high self-esteem. When I was young and I was reading the New Testament, I really couldn't understand that kind of self-esteem. And I secretly thought that Jesus was kind of
kind of a wimp.
well, no, I thought he was kind of, proud. I thought he was kind of like, I thought he was kind of haughty. I thought he was, because I didn't understand what I didn't have.
Because of like, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. Is that why you got that?
No, because he just had so much self-esteem. I didn't have any.
Oh, I see.
He had so much because we think that self-esteem is a menace to community, and it should not be.
Right.
Everyone should be vested with self-esteem because that's how God regards us. So I see Jesus in all of this, and loving the moon and dance and those things. Jesus celebrated life, and he celebrated with his friends. He drank. He probably would be tempted to smoke a good Cuban. He made it. He could smoke it. I'm just, I think he enjoyed himself to every extent he could, and he kept to his mission. And as difficult as it was, he still took the way with the despised. And that purple, that's one of the reasons why purple is such a liturgical color in the Christian church. That purple symbolizes that deep suffering, that deep suffering of Jesus. He always took the way with the most despised, and he became the most despised himself. Cursed is the one who hangs on a tree. And he hung on a tree, and he bore himself the sins of the world. And that's what the story tells us about him. I mean, whether we literally believe the crucifixion is a transactional thing or not, that's neither here nor there. What's deeply important is we remember about Jesus that he signified as God, very God of very God, entered into the deep suffering of humankind and didn't flinch. So.
All right, what else? Growing out of the book or from other parts of what she's been saying?
No, and just if you have a question, Grant has the microphone. This is like television. If you don't speak into the microphone, our Sunday morning group won't be able to hear you.
Okay, so where's my thing here?
So I wish this weren't recorded, but what is the purpose of life?
Hold it real close, Mary Sue.
What is the purpose of life? And I thought in the Hindu session that we had,
Hold it closer.
one of the most important things that I learned from that, which I think is all of this, and Christian, is when they greet somebody, they say, I can't remember the word.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste. And that means, I see the best in you, I see the holy in you, I see everything in you, and I think that's just a wonderful way to be in your life, and that affects all of this. Just if you see in others only wonderful things, it changed me, and I think it's a better sense of Christianity too.
I think you're absolutely right, and Saint Augustine taught us to regard all of life as a sacrament, as a potential revealer of something about God. Every person, every face. And I do. I'm searching for the God in you. Every time I see a face, a new face, I'm searching for it. And I'm searching hearts, and I'm searching minds, and I'm finding more often than not.
And where's the power problem? It's a different way of thinking. I don't know.
It's a problem of power because people have hoarded that image of God too, though. I mean, even the very images that are part of our religions can be very oppressive to folk. White Jesus, I'm sorry. He wasn't nowhere near white. He 100 miles from Africa, he wasn't white. He was not white, no. And there are cultural ties, and that's, people have controlled the images of God for a long time, so that our imaginations are very challenged to see the image of God as something other than, as Alice Walker describes in The Color Purple, old and gray-bearded and white, and he go barefooted. So we're challenged by those. But we have to decolonize our minds. We have to redeem our minds, or take our minds back from the people who have controlled the images that fill our minds. And we have to fill our minds. We can't even think of the Last Supper except in terms of Da Vinci's very linear drawing, without any women in it. And they would have been there had they just been serving. Now, I believe they were there enjoying too, because if he was with them in his life, why in the hour of his death would he exclude them from the party? But our imaginations are limited by what we continuously see all the time. And we need to decolonize our minds, all of us, everybody does. And we need to be able to see that thing differently.
All right, what else?
Okay, so I'm wondering why you think Joan chose to talk about love with Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have the monopoly on that? I mean, or...
Oh, sure, absolutely.
What's your thing?
Clearly, we haven't heard anything about love from the other speakers, so... You weren't here to,
I've been watching.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
So I'm just curious about that. As theologians, what's your thinking on that? I mean, that's a pretty big claim that the Christians are about love. There's a lot of Christians I know I'm not so sure of, but your thoughts?
Well, I don't think we have a monopoly on love, but you have to think about Christianity in context. One time I was reading the Gospel of John devotionally, and I was reading Greek plays for fun. And kind of concurrently, just put one down, pick the other one up. And at some point in time, I began to realize that the texts were talking to each other, because they were written like in the same Greco-Roman North African context, right? And the Greek concept of God is of a God who is petulant. The main god, Zeus, is mean, petulant, and hates humankind. And in fact created humankind in order to make them slaves of the gods. And that's true for in the ancient Near East too, that was a different God from Yahweh. That the gods of the ancient Near East were very different. They hated humankind too. So I was reading John, as I said, and I came across the most familiar passage of Scripture in the world, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And you could really gloss over that because you've heard it so many times. But that's really revolutionary in context. To say that God loves the world and did not come into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. That's really very powerful. And so no, I don't think we have the monopoly on love. I think that love is is truly what we say is an attribute of God, because it's an attribute of Jesus, who Scriptures, John also says, manifested what God is like. And so it's a taking the Christian prerogative and saying Christian love is the way we are known, and we
Yeah,
sing,
that's right.
They know we are Christians by our love.
Yeah. Yeah, I think to me, that's kind of the key point, is that the reason that strikes you is kind of like, oh, she gave love to the Christians, and love is clearly the best. I mean, you only think that because your background is Christian. I mean, she talks about, the word for Hinduism is wisdom. And, I think you could make a big argument that wisdom to them is the core of it all. And that Jewish community, what is more beautiful than real community? It implies love, it assumes love, it shares love, etc., etc., etc. And even, although it's very strange to our eyes, Islamic submission. To us, submission sounds, you're going to hear this next week, some part of it, I imagine. Islamic submission sounds like, what? It's such an anti-American sentiment, but to them, losing your will in the will of the divine is everything.
Yes.
That's what submission's all about. And so, I think that your response to the word love is partly based just on, where you're coming from. And it is, I'm not saying love's not a good thing, but I had a professor in seminary, Richard Hayes. Do you know that name? Yeah. He was a New Testament professor at Duke. He said that love is actually not really all that major of a theme in the New Testament. It was interesting that the sources you mentioned were all from John, because in the Johannine literature, love is everything. But Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, much of the rest of Paul, love is not something that is focused on more than other things. So. What else? Grant.
So you mentioned that love, and this I think was Cornel West, love publicly is justice. And justice in sort of the way I understand it is working towards dismantling and even overthrowing the systems of power that privilege certain folk over others. So I guess my question is, what is the message to those who are directly privileged by the system? So what is, I know Jesus is challenging us to challenge those systems, but if you could speak to how one with a lot of privilege goes about dismantling that, either for themselves or in the world around them.
Well, he had many solutions for folk. He said to one person, go sell everything you have, give to the poor, and come and follow me. Maybe that's not your directive, but maybe your directive is to utilize your resources to become a source of empowerment to others. I think privilege is given to be given away, really, and that's just, and how we do that. We can be creative in the way that we do that, or we can be rash and irresponsible, or we can be, we can be bold too. We can be bold in what we do, but it's hard. I'm not trying to claim that it's easy. Because people justify privilege too, so yes.
Oh no.
You have a question?
Craig, were you going to say something? I have another one. So, give you a minimum moment to think. So you mentioned right at the end you didn't like her. This kind of ties in with what Grant was saying, but you didn't like her answer to what is the purpose of life, because she basically said almsgiving,
Right.
which is basically charity, which is honestly kind of a lot of what we do around here. It is, I think, deceptive in the way that we feel like we are giving, when oftentimes what we're doing is just making ourselves feel better by the giving. So talk a little bit more about that.
So don't get me wrong, I think that benevolence is a good thing, but it can't be the only way in which we engage the world. We have to begin to think about how do we actually empower people, and what is the power that people need. I went to Haiti a couple of years ago, and the NGOs there do a very bad disservice to the people. They just take them water, they take them food, they take them our cast-off clothes, but they never agitate for our government to change its policies towards Haiti. Now, Haiti has been the symbol of freedom in the Western world, that the Western world actually hates because they're free. That's the only reason why Haiti has been left to not develop. And so they go there and they do their benevolence, and they think they're doing a good job, and they think they're being kind, and no, they're just reinscribing poverty on the Haitians continuously. And they're actually living in their own compounds in paradise while they go out and help the suffering others to make it through another day, rather than helping them help themselves. And so we got to get a different understanding of the relationship between benevolence and empowerment, and how we can be more on the side of empowering folk than just benevolence. Benevolence can save your life, literally save somebody's life. But it can't be the only way that we do it. We have to put that in conversation with deeper commitments to creating a world that would make God happy. So.
How would you do that?
What I just said, one of the ways we do that is we agitate our own government. Our government participates in that marginalization of such a country heavily, by the way that we ignore the very needs of Haitians. So it happened with it's not just because President Obama is such a wonderful president, although I think he is, that the Cubans now enjoy a measure of a relationship with us that we didn't have before. It's because the Cuban community agitated our government, and they wanted something, a different kind of relationship, and we got to want that for others too, around the world. We got to think about what it's going to take. Not in every case do countries need the same things. The Israel-Palestine situation is so intractable that the United Church of Christ has supported BDS, and I actually support BDS. Because I know that those sanctions worked. They worked in South Africa, and not because the South African government was so righteous either. No, but because people agitated for change. That's why South Africa is free today, although, there are still some systemic and structural problems with South Africa. At least people can vote in their own country,
Yeah.
And of course, there's, like I say, systemic problems still, and the multinational corporations that have their interests there are not going away quietly.
Yeah. I correct anything I say if it's misleading or doesn't represent you, but it seems that one of the additional ways you would respond to that is to say that to begin to dismantle some of that systematic oppression, that the need to, or to say it more positively, to begin to empower those who need it, is simply by being willing to listen to the voices that are calling for the justice, even if their call is not perfect.
Right.
I mean, you can't expect people out of their pain and suffering to get it all figured out and present you with a plan. It's like, I'm sorry, listen to the pain. Join them in it. And then maybe you can begin to figure it out together. And then the other thing I would say is the traditional answer of the African American church, which is, of course, education. I mean, you at least didn't have an extensive background in the black church as a very young person till your Pentecostal uncle, I guess. But the black church has responded to the need for empowerment by education. I mean, the black churches have been the center of education in the black community for, probably,
For as long as
they've been around.
In America,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And the black church has a deep history, too, in the country. From the brush arbors, which they called the hush harbors, because they would turn over a pot, and then they believed that their slaveholders could not hear them when they were worshiping God in their own way. But so the church has a long and deep history in the country, and it has been the forum and clearinghouse for every issue that pertains to the community, whether it's political, educational, whether it's concerning the entire community. We're there for the folk, and so I have been. I didn't talk about my journey through some of the denominations, but after I was actually baptized on Rollins College campus by my campus minister, and was affiliated.
They didn't accept your 8-year-old baptism of yourself?
Well, they did. I didn't tell them. but I was affiliated with the United Church of Christ in Winter Park. It was then the Congregational Church. And then after I graduated from Rollins, I went to the Baptist church, because it was kind of close to the Black Baptist church, kind of close to my Pentecostal experience, a little freer. Just a little, though. Just a little. And then when I moved to New York, I joined Convent Avenue Baptist Church, which was an American Baptist congregation and a National Baptist congregation. They were combined. So the American Baptist part of them were progressive. The National Baptist not so progressive concerning women. So I was licensed to preach in Convent. Then I did my internship at an AME Zion church, a Methodist church in White Plains, New York. And when it came time to get ordained, both of them wanted to ordain me. So I went with the Methodist church, since it was kind of close to my Pentecostal experience. My Pentecostal theology and Methodist theology are very closely related. So I went with the AME Zion Church because the local church had supported me very well. So I've been ordained in the AME Zion Church for 25 plus years. But now, in the last 3-4 years, I've experienced some illness, and I've moved away through the illness from the strictures of the church, so that I could explore the depth of my spirituality. And I've reacquainted myself with Buddhism. These are my Buddhist mala beads. I've reacquainted myself with Buddhism, and it's been a profound awakening for me, because I don't think enlightenment and salvation are antithetical goals. I think they're wonderful concurrent goals. And since Jesus has already secured my salvation, I don't have to worry about that.
That's right.
And so I'm working on enlightenment now. And I know a lot about Taoism and Hinduism, and they have been companion spirituality to me for a very long time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you very, very much, Dr. Terrell. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you too so much.
What a life, what a blessing.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so next week we will talk about Islam, the imam of the mosque that meets down on Plainfield Road near the corner of 83 and Plainfield. It's called Mecca. Mecca stands for something. It's like it's a very non-theological name. It's like Metropolitan something Community of Chicago area or something like that. So although the word Mecca, of course, is a very theological word, the acronym actually isn't theological at all. But the imam from Mecca will be here next week. Hassan Ali. He's a great guy, very interesting, very actively engaged with the community and with trying to help people understand better what Islam is all about. To, of course, in the world today, to try to get rid of the ridiculous Islamophobia that's so prevalent in our country right now. And so I think it'll be really fascinating. Read the chapters if you haven't read them yet, and come next week, same time, same place. So thank you very much.
Thank you.